Reflections with Marilyn Baker. Brought to you by Torch Trust, the Christian organisation with a vision for people with sight loss.
Hello and welcome to Reflections from Torch Trust, the show that focuses on faith and disability in today's world. I'm Marilyn Baker and it's wonderful to have your company. This week on Reflections, we'll be exploring mental health with the author and speaker Rachael Newham. We'll be hearing our thought for the week in around 15 minutes, which is thinking about the foundations of newly built houses and Jesus. All will be revealed very soon. But it's time now to hear from author and speaker Rachael Newham, who chats with Chris Byland for Reflections on the subject of mental health and her faith. Rachael's story is incredibly candid, powerful and honest.
Reflections from Torch Trust.
Rachael Newham is a freelance theology of mental health specialist who has founded and worked on numerous projects supporting others with mental health. She now spends much of her time travelling the country, preaching, speaking, and writing about issues related to faith and mental health. Rachael, welcome to Reflections.
Thank you for having me, Chris.
Now, mental health has become a much talked about subject in recent years, something which has been so important for many people, including yourself. For anyone hearing you for the first time today, are you able to share with us some of your background and story, please?
Yeah, sure. We all have mental health, but my journey with poor mental health and mental illness started when I was 14, which, quite terrifyingly for me anyway, was 20 years ago. And I was quite ill as a teenager and struggled with self-harm and an eating disorder, and kind of culminated, I guess, in trying to take my own life when I was 16. And then in my 20s, I was very well, sort of as well as I get. I've come to realise, I think, over the last couple of years that there are quite strict boundaries, I guess, of my wellness and kind of what I'm able to do. And then my 30s again have been a time where I've not been particularly well. But throughout all of that, one of my passions is not separating our faith from our mental health, and certainly not separating it from mental illness. You know, in the same way that God speaks to us through our physical health and physical illness, God speaks to us through our mental health and our mental illness. And the Bible isn't silent on it either.
I suppose the question there really is, at what point did you become a Christian? And how did that impact your life at that moment you became a Christian? Were you struggling with any symptoms of mental illness at the time when you became a Christian?
No, I was 5 when I became Christian. And it remains to this day one of the most profound experiences of the Spirit I've ever had, actually. That sense of being loved by God was something that just really clicked for me at that really young age. And so I found it particularly difficult when I was a teenager, and a lot of my friends were becoming Christians and saying, oh, it's great, I've become a Christian and now my life is so much better. And I felt a little bit like the elder brother in the story of the prodigal son saying, I've been here all this time and actually life's just got worse. So where are you in this, God? And what do you think you're doing? Quite frankly, was my general prayer.
Wow. So where did you find God in those moments of the thoughts you were having? Was God always present in those moments where you were having a bad time?
He was. I didn't always feel it, but I felt deeply connected and deeply cared for by my church. Church was my sanctuary. It was the place that I ran to when I felt awful. It was the place that I learned, perhaps without ever learning the word, but I learned to lament and say to God everything that I was feeling and being really raw and open and honest with God. And that kind of that was always okay in the church I grew up in, thankfully. And that became the bedrock of my faith, actually, just that ongoing honesty with God. that I didn't feel like I needed to put on a happy face or to hide how I was feeling. Not that there would have been any point, but I just felt that church was my sanctuary, was my safe place. And that really helped to keep me connected to God and to faith, because I just wanted to be at church in the place that we were talking about God, because it felt safe.
Yeah, I bet it did. I bet it did. And I suppose my question following that is, you've spent time as an inpatient in hospitals and places like that. Did you
Mm.
also find that God was present with you then too?
Yes, I did. They certainly weren't places that felt safe in any other way, but they were places that I felt God with me very tangibly. And in fact, the first time I was ever an inpatient, the ward was really loud. I was 16 and I was on an adult ward. And it was in that time that kind of my mum passed me my iPod Shuffle, as it was at the time,
Hmm.
and I shoved the headphones in and turned up the first thing that I had on it really loudly, which was a sermon that the pastor of my church had given recently, and it was talking about the Word becoming flesh and God moving into the neighborhood. And I just had the sense of these words: "We've got to shine in here." And I had absolutely no idea what that meant. And I didn't, to be perfectly frank, I didn't care that much, because for me, it just felt like, well, okay, I'm really glad that this needs to change, but at the moment, it's taking all I have to stay here.
Hmm.
And those words, didn't come back to me for a good 4 or 5 years, until I started volunteering as a chaplain on a mental health unit. And the first time I visited, I nearly threw up because I felt so anxious and so overwhelmed. But as I spoke to people, the thing that came back to me was that phrase that we've got to shine in here. And that was ultimately what led to setting up the charity that I ran for a decade.
Wow. We'll talk about the charity a little bit later, but you really have kind of been strong and with God by your side by the sounds of things. And you've lived with mental illness for a very long time.
Mm.
And as I'm sure you and many people know, there are lots of peaks and troughs, as you've just explained. How are you doing today?
Yeah, it's hard today. It's hard. It's sort of post COVID. I was strangely, and I've spoken to a few people about this with chronic illness, kind of okay in the depths of lockdown in COVID, because I was used to running on that kind of adrenaline-y, just get through the day
Hmm.
mentality. But it was when it was over, and that kind of lifestyle stuff again, that actually it is hard, and it is something that probably for the first time in my life, it disables me in a way that it never has done before. And so learning to live with that, learning to learn my limits, has been an interesting journey.
Thank you for sharing that, Rachel. I know that's a really, really powerful story. I'm sure loads of people listening to this today will really resonate with what you're saying. What kind of things do you practice to help maintain your mental health and your faith?
So I guess the main thing for me is writing. I write a lot, and I read a lot. Not I do read the Bible, but I read sort of Christian books, and I write, I journal. And part of my job is as a writer, and I find that that helps me. Whether I'm writing, a book or an article, I often find that I learn as much about God, probably more than I'm ever trying to tell anybody else.
Hmm.
I find that that keeps me kind of deeply connected. And then other things that about medication and having a really supportive community and my family and friends. And I think that sense of being with people with whom I don't need to pretend that I am okay is probably the most powerful thing for me.
Wow, that's really good to hear. I'm glad that you are able to be yourself, because a lot of people, I guess, they will try and hide their mental illness, or if they're struggling with something. Has that been a challenge for you, being able to actually be yourself around people? Has that taken a long time?
Yeah, it's interesting because I've probably experienced more what's called self-stigma than kind of stigma from other people. And I kind of found myself sort of beating myself up because I can't do things at the speed or with the energy that other people can do them. And I find that really difficult.
Mm.
But I think that for me, it's been about learning to live with it. And the fact that actually, there's a poet who said it, but we all move within our own restraints. And actually, even the people who look like they have the most energy and are the most together are probably struggling with something. And for some people, it will be, I guess, an official disability. And for others, it will be perhaps limit their functioning less. But we all live with something that hurts and that impacts us.
Mm. That's so
And
true.
having that mindset helps because not in a I'm glad everyone's hurting way, but in a way that actually we're saying we all have something, that we all have a weakness that we need God in. It's that classic thorn in the side of Paul,
Mm.
talking about, the grace is where he is weakest. And I think that's true for everybody. I think if leaders as well are able to be honest about where they're weak rather than feeling like they have to be superhuman, we would have much safer, gentler communities.
Mm. Yeah, I totally agree with you. And I think honesty is key, especially from people who are leading, as you say. How difficult is it for someone, especially speaking to you today with experience, that might be struggling with a mental health condition or an illness, to reach out and get some support? Because for a lot of people, picking up the phone to call their local doctor, or even just someone they know, to actually say, "Hey, I'm really struggling today. I need some support. I need some help." It can be really difficult, can't it?
It can, and it can be difficult in part because it's no secret that the mental health services in this country, despite having some incredible people working for them, the system is quite broken.
Mm.
Um, but what I've found is having something specific that you can ask for enables others to help you better. Because quite often people don't know how to help. And I think, if there's a physical disability, there's often something quite tangible that we can do.
Mm.
But when it's mental health, people don't know what to do. And so having people that you're able to say, actually, you know what, cooking is the real struggle of the week, or I need a lift to the doctors or somebody to talk to, and trying to work out within yourself what it is you need can be really helpful. And the same is true, because we have, often quite limited times with doctors and GPs and things, being able to say, these are the things that are impacting me most. And actually, these are the things that I think could or might help me most, can be really useful to kind of get the best out of the time that is offered.
Mm. I totally agree. That's a really, really helpful piece of advice. Thank you, Rachel. And you've kind of answered my next question. Really, is if someone perhaps doesn't know the first step of how to ask, where should they point themselves to? I guess the obvious answer is trying to pick up the phone to your local GP.
Yeah. Ultimately, the GP is sort of the gateway to any secondary services. So a community mental health team is known as a secondary service. And for those who are living with mental illnesses, having the involvement of the community mental health team can be really helpful for some people. For other people, it might be that actually it's not mental illness, but it is poor mental health. And there might be kind of particular causes for that. So, if you're struggling with grief, that impacts your mental health, but that isn't a mental illness. And so in cases like that, finding supportive spaces, whether it be finding a counsellor or a grief support group, or kind of, utilising some of the great charities around. That can be a really helpful step as well.
Yeah, and I think it's really important to define the two. As you've just said there, grief isn't a mental illness, but it's important, regardless of how you're feeling today, to try and get some support, whatever stage you're currently feeling at. Definitely go out, reach out to someone, whether that's a charity, your local GP. Definitely try and reach out to someone today.
We're so grateful to Rachael Newham for chatting with us about her journey of living with mental illness and how her faith has helped her too. We'll hear more from Rachael and her journey next week here on Reflections. If you're struggling with your own mental health, as Rachael talked about in her interview, do make sure you seek out some medical advice from a GP or support from a friend or family member, or one of the many charities which exist to help people make the first step. Let's pray and give thanks for the skills and compassion of mental health professionals, social services, and the staff and trustees of charities and businesses responsible for specialist provision. Pray that they will be able to continue in their work to improve the lives of people living with mental illness. And we pray for those struggling with their mental health, that they may be strengthened by the power of God today. Amen. It's time now for our thought for the week, which is thinking about Jesus and new build houses. Perhaps an odd combination, you might think, but let's take a listen. It's written by Alan Vogt and read for us by James Brookman.
Where I live in Surrey, we're facing the proposed invasion of over 1,000 houses. They're already digging up the land for the foundations and putting in pipes for the utilities, gas, electric, water and sewerage. As Jesus spoke to the crowds in Bible times, he used the illustration of foundations, so necessary to give the house strength to withstand the storms. Jesus explained that we need to stick close to him to make us strong when the storms of life beat down on us. Pain, sorrow, bereavement, breakdown in relationship, and so on. The famous playwright William Shakespeare described the storms of life as the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune. We could say that the rooms of a house are a picture of life. The hall to greet visitors, the lounge for social activities, the kitchen for all our provisions, the study for work, the bedroom for rest, and the front door, either open and welcoming or closed tight shut. There's an amazing verse in the last book of the Bible, Revelation, where Jesus says, "Here I am, I stand at the door and knock. If anyone hears my voice and opens the door, I will go in and eat with him and he with me." That's Revelation chapter 3, verse 20. In Holman Hunt's famous painting, The Light of the World, which is based on this verse, Jesus holds a lamp, alive after his death by crucifixion, but still showing the scars of the nails in his hands and feet. The painting is a picture for us of his sacrificial love for us on the cross, now knocking at the door of the house. He shows his amazing grace in that he waits patiently, knocking on the door of our lives, not imposing himself on us, but wanting us to invite him in. What would happen, I wonder, if Jesus came knocking at my door, or at yours?
Thank you to James for reading to us this week's thought. I'd certainly love to have Jesus knocking at my door. How about you? Well, that's just about it from us this week on Reflections. Don't forget that if you've missed our special Sight Loss Sunday service programme last time, that you can listen back to it online at torchtrust.org. It featured CEO of Torch, Sarah Dawkins, and trustee Tony Brown sharing with us their thoughts, and a sermon especially for Sight Loss Sunday. To find out more about Torch Trust and the work it's doing to support people with sight loss across the UK, you can call the team on 01858 438 260, and they'll be only too happy to help in any way they can, whether that's helping to find Bible resources, books in Braille or large print, and for more information about sight loss friendly churches. So that number again is 01858 438 260. Join us again next week when we'll hear the second part of our conversation with Rachael Newham. But until then, from me, Marilyn Baker, God bless.
Reflections from Torch Trust.